They laughed at her, mocked her confidence, whispered in locker rooms, and smirked in briefings when Captain Sarah Mitchell stood tall in her flight suit, squared her shoulders, and said with calm conviction, "I can fly stealth," as if the idea of an F-16 vanishing from radar was a fairy tale, as if the words of a woman in a squadron dominated by arrogant men could never carry weight. But what none of them knew was that those same words would one day echo across history when she downed 15 enemy jets without ever being seen, rewriting the rules of air combat and proving that true mastery is not about technology, but about the pilot in the cockpit. And before I take you into her story, let me say this. If you believe in underdogs who rise when the world doubts them, if you believe in warriors who refuse to bow, in legends written not in books but in the fire of jet exhaust and the silence of radar screens, then smash that subscribe button right now, because this journey is going to keep you glued until the last word, and Sarah's fight is one you cannot miss. Her story began not in victory but in shadows of doubt. A childhood in Dallas, where she stared at contrails and swore she'd touch the sky even when neighbors told her to dream smaller. A cadet who endured every insult, every test, every grueling drill until she clawed her way into Langley's elite Falcon squadron, only to discover that earning a seat in an F-16 was just the start, because respect came even harder. She spent nights alone in the simulator, studying radar returns, memorizing every contour of terrain maps, learning how shadows on screens could hide a jet if flown with precision, crafting her own doctrine of invisible flight while her peers laughed and called her Princess Falcon. One cocky pilot, Jason Cole, made a sport of mocking her, running mock dogfights where he killed her 5 times a night, not realizing she was deliberately feeding his ego, testing the limits of her theory in silence, learning how to vanish under the cover of arrogance. Then war erupted overseas, a hostile nation fielding 15 elite fighters near a no-fly zone, and Sarah's squadron was ordered on reconnaissance with strict commands not to engage. But when she strapped into her jet and the canopy sealed, with a hiss like fate itself, she felt the old laughter in her ears and whispered, "Watch me." Over the Mediterranean, she saw it, an opening no one else noticed, a corridor of radar shadows created by terrain and interference, a window into the unseen. She broke formation, dove low over the waves, ignored shouted orders, and vanished. The first enemy fighter roared past, blind to her presence until her missile struck and his jet fell burning. Controllers doubted her. Squadron leaders dismissed her. But kill after kill lit the skies as Sarah danced through the corridor like a phantom, picking off enemies who never once saw her coming. To them it was terror, missiles from nowhere, ghosts. In the dark and within minutes, 15 jets were gone, their comms filled with panic and disbelief. When she landed, helmet tucked under her arm, her squadron stood in stunned silence. The same men who laughed now pale and speechless, because they had witnessed the impossible. Yet as cheers rose and reports spread, Sarah felt a chill beneath the triumph, a sense that her discovery had unsettled more than enemies, for someone in command had ignored her for too long. Someone who understood that if her method of stealth could be replicated, it would shift the balance of aerial warfare forever. And not everyone wanted that balance to change, opened with silence heavier than applause. Because while Sarah's squadron marveled at her impossible victory, higher command reacted with unease, summoning her into debrief rooms where generals wore stiff faces and asked more about her methods than her courage. Their clipped questions, betraying fear that her invisible flight doctrine was too dangerous, too disruptive, something that could upend years of established tactics. They praised her publicly, but warned her privately to stick to standard protocols, a contradiction that gnawed at her because she had saved their mission, destroyed 15 enemies, and yet was treated like a threat inside her own base. Rumors spread among pilots. Some called her a witch, others a miracle. And Jason Cole, humiliated after mocking her for months, began whispering that she had cheated with classified tech, trying to turn suspicion into his weapon. Sarah trained harder, refining her method, but noticed strange things. Her flight logs went missing, her simulator sessions were erased, and one night she caught a shadow slipping from her locker, proof someone was sabotaging her. Worse still, intelligence came in that the enemy was adapting, deploying new radar systems designed to counter unknown phantoms, proof that her secret had leaked, though she had shared it with no one. Torn between loyalty to her squadron and the rising fear that someone inside her own command wanted her silenced, Sarah realized her greatest battle would not be in the skies, but within the halls of power that feared her talent, and as new orders came down for a mission deep in hostile airspace, she felt the trap tightening, a mission designed not for glory, but to see her fail or die. Began with the roar of engines and the weight of suspicion pressing on Sarah's shoulders as she prepared for the mission that felt less like strategy and more like a carefully laid trap, because the orders were vague, the objectives uncertain, and the target zone bristled with enemy activity far beyond what reconnaissance had reported, as though someone had fed her false intelligence. Yet Sarah strapped in, tightened her harness, and whispered to herself that if this was the test they wanted, she would survive it, because surviving would be the loudest defiance of all. As her F-16 climbed into the twilight sky, she noticed Jason Cole's jet on her wing, his voice unusually cold over comms, volunteering at the last minute to be her wingman, a detail that raised every instinct in her chest, but she kept her doubts quiet and focused on the flight plan. The air grew hostile quickly, radar spikes lancing across her screens, enemy patrols crisscrossing in unnatural patterns as though expecting her arrival, and it hit her like a blade. Someone in her command had betrayed her, feeding her location to the enemy, turning her mission into an ambush. Jason's tone shifted, mocking as he told her to follow his lead, and when she refused, he cut his radio, dove ahead, and lured her straight toward the kill zone, revealing himself not as a comrade, but as a pawn of those who wanted her gone. The sky erupted in missiles and tracer fire, a cage of death closing in, but Sarah's doctrine of invisible flight became her salvation. She dropped altitude so low her jet's vapor trail skimmed the sea, pulling into a radar shadow that fooled the enemy and made her vanish again, ghosts whispering in the wind. One by one she struck, weaving between lock-on tones, her hands steady though her heart pounded like thunder, destroying patrols who thought they had cornered her. Jason's voice crackled once more, panicked now, claiming his systems were jammed, begging for help. But Sarah knew he had led her here to die and that his distress call might be another ploy. Still, she had a choice. To abandon him and prove herself ruthless, or to save him and show that integrity mattered more than vengeance. She chose the latter, diving into the chaos, blasting an enemy fighter off his tail in a maneuver so sharp it nearly tore her jet apart, leaving Jason alive but humiliated once again. As she cleared the skies and limped her damaged jet home, Sarah understood the trap had failed, but the war within her command was far from over. Someone powerful wanted her erased, someone willing to sacrifice both her and her squadron's honor. And the deeper question haunted her as she touched down. How far would they go to bury the truth of her invisible flight? And could she outfly not only her enemies in the sky, but the betrayal festering in the ranks below? Erupted, not in silence, but in thunder, the kind of storm that no pilot could ignore. Because Sarah's survival of the ambush had not only embarrassed her enemies overseas, but had also ripped open the hidden fractures within her own command. And now she was at the center of something larger than she had ever imagined, a battle that was no longer just about jets and missiles, but about truth and betrayal, loyalty and corruption, a test of whether one woman could stand against the machinery of both war and politics. Days after limping home with her battered F-16, she was grounded under the pretense of maintenance review. But Sarah knew better. She felt the eyes of intelligence officers stalking her, documents disappearing from her locker, whispers about her being unstable. And then an anonymous message appeared in her quarters, a single line scrawled across a torn map. "They will bury you in the next mission." She realized then that Jason Cole's betrayal had not been his alone. He was a puppet, a disposable tool for those in higher ranks who wanted her gone, men who feared that her doctrine of invisible flight would expose their complacency, disrupt their control, and shift power into the hands of a pilot they could not manipulate. But fate has a way of setting fire to the lies of powerful men, and when a new crisis erupted, when satellite feeds showed an enemy strike force of 24 aircraft preparing to sweep across Allied borders, Sarah was pulled back into the storm because no one else had the skills to stop it. She was ordered to remain on standby, a cowardly attempt to sideline her, yet her squadron, now shaken by the memory of her phantom kills, looked at her not with laughter but with desperate belief, and in their eyes she saw the unspoken truth. They trusted her more than command. That night, against orders, Sarah took to the sky, her F-16 gleaming under a pale moon, Jason on the runway watching her lift off, shame in his eyes but also something else, regret, and perhaps the faint spark of loyalty. The enemy swarm was already advancing, 24 jets in lethal formation, but Sarah did not flinch. She slid into the radar shadows, her invisible doctrine unfolding like a deadly symphony. Every maneuver calculated, every strike like a phantom's touch. Missiles screamed, enemy pilots shouted in confusion, their radars showing nothing but ghosts, their formation crumbling as one after another fell, and for a moment the sky belonged to her alone, an American angel of war weaving death unseen. But then came the twist. One jet remained, larger, faster, an experimental stealth fighter stolen from Allied designs, and Sarah realized with a jolt that the enemy had not just adapted to her doctrine, they had built a weapon to counter it. The dogfight that followed was unlike anything she had faced, radar shadows no longer enough, her maneuvers matched blow for blow, and in the chaos, her jet took a hit, alarms screaming, flames licking at her fuselage. She should have ejected, but Sarah was not done. With one final surge, she cut power, killed her radar, and let gravity drag her into a dive so steep it mimicked destruction, her pursuer locking on to finish her, only for Sarah to reignite at the last second, flipping into his blind spot and firing a single missile that tore the enemy stealth apart in a blaze brighter than dawn. With her jet crippled, she barely clawed back to Allied airspace, every warning light flashing, her body broken by G-forces. But when she touched down, the world erupted in disbelief, because she had not only destroyed the enemy strike force, but had outmatched a stealth fighter designed to counter her very method. Crowds gathered, the media swarmed, and commanders who once dismissed her now scrambled to claim her victory as their doctrine. Yet Sarah knew the truth, that the battle was not won in the sky, but in the courage to stand when no one believed her, to fight when even allies turned traitor. Jason approached her then, silent, offering a salute heavy with apology, and though she gave him nothing more than a nod, she knew he had been broken and remade by her survival. In the weeks that followed, whispers turned to headlines. The Pentagon, investigating the sabotage that had nearly cost her life, and while many in power still sought to bury her methods, the legend of the woman who flew stealth in an F-16 spread faster than lies could contain. They had laughed when she said it, they had doubted when she proved it. But after the night she destroyed 24 jets, unseen until the final explosion lit the horizon, the world no longer laughed. They listened, they feared, and they remembered. Her name, Captain Sarah Mitchell, the phantom of the skies who rewrote the rules of war.